Shadow of the Colossus is defined by its sense of ambiguity. From the world building to character motivations, the player is privy only to a few concrete details that in turn allow for diverse interpretations of the story. In order for such an ambiguous narrative to work, however, it is ironically the information that is not up for debate that allows the player's thoughts to wander. These finer details anchor the game's world into the player's mind, allowing for speculation as to what the catalysts of the shown events could possibly be. The devil is in the details, as they say, and with that in mind, it should be noted that ambiguity does not mean the game has nothing to say, for there is a strong and resonant message underneath its veil. The game is centered around the protagonist Wander and his intense desire to revive Mono, a woman that fell victim to sacrifice due to her supposed cursed fate, an ominous statement that is never expounded upon in the game. To achieve his goal, he travels to a far-off place known as the Forbidden Lands, and true to its namesake, it's a location that Wander was warned never to step foot in. Once Wander arrives, he is confronted by unusual beings that appear to be either enveloped by or consist of darkness. Without batting an eye, he confidently dispatches them with the power of the ancient sword by shining its brilliant light upon them. Shortly after dealing with the creatures, a disembodied voice bellows from an opening in the ceiling. Wander's immediate reaction to this unusual occurrence is to inquire if the voice belongs to Dormin. Much of what has occurred in these scenes establishes a key detail: Wander's keen sense of self-awareness. He knew exactly where he was going in order to reach the Forbidden Lands. He showed no fear when vanquishing the shadow creatures, and on top of that, he specifically asks if the voice belonged to Dormin. Wander has a certain level of expectation that is being met. Therefore, it's easy to conclude that all of this preparativeness is due to the legends that have been passed down by his people, warning him of the dangers that will befall anyone foolish enough to infiltrate these lands. Despite these warnings, however, Wander is still here, breaking those taboos. While the details of these legends are not revealed, it's safe to assume that Wander has a firm grasp of what he's gotten himself into. The voice confirms Wander's suspicion, prompting a follow-up question about resurrecting Mono. Dormin responds, saying that lost souls cannot be reclaimed, but with the ancient sword, it might not be impossible. Dormin presses upon Wander that he will pay a heavy price for her revival should he succeed. However, it is a price that he is not only willing to pay, but one he accepts with unreserved hesitation. While it's uncertain as to whether or not Wander understood the specificity of the fate that would befall him, it's clear that this is of no concern to him. This, along with everything else leading up to this point, should clue the viewer in on not only Wander's most important character trait, but the entire thematic core of Shadow of the Colossus: his unshakable obsession. Once the introduction finishes, the game truly begins, and the player themselves must traverse across the Forbidden Lands in order to snuff out the lives of the 16 colossi that reside in it. When confronting the first Colossus, a short cutscene plays, and it appears as a giant, intimidating, and formidable creature. As it slowly saunters across the valley, its steps audibly quake the surrounding land with each imposing thud. This would be enough to make even the most courageous of warriors cower in fear and flee for their lives. Yet throughout all of this spectacle, our protagonist does not do or say anything. It is as if he is so fixated on his goals that even this hulking behemoth will not sway him. Wander's reaction is truly at odds with his comparatively fragile frame. For the sake of transparency, it should be noted that in the PS4 remake, Wander does exhibit a response when first encountering the Colossus, despite the fact that no such reaction exists in the original version. Given that the remake was handled by Bluepoint and not by Team Ico, it's possible that this was simply a creative liberty on their part. As such, this particular observation will be based on the original version and not the remakes. Going back to the analysis proper, while it is true that our protagonist wields the ancient sword, a mysterious weapon that clearly possesses some form of mythical power, it is undeniable that he himself is still only human, and therefore prone to his own mortality. While it would have been understandable had Wander become numb to the sight of a Colossus after confronting 2 or 3, the fact that he doesn't exhibit any emotional response during his initial encounter carries with it worrying implications. Taking into consideration everything Wander has done up to this point, it's clear that he is resolute to an unreasonable degree, for he is a man that is actively being consumed by his own drive to see things through to the end. To him, the deaths of each Colossus is merely a means to an end, and it comes across that these acts of slaying the Colossus do not even cross his mind as anything more than an objective being fulfilled. What gives this a distinctly disturbing quality is the player's forced compliance, as they have an active role in Wander's obsession destroying him from within, both literally and figuratively. After the defeat of every Colossus, ominous shadow-like tendrils emerge from the remains of the fallen foe, and without fail, this foreboding darkness violently penetrates its assailant. Dorman himself confirms that he was split into 16 parts as an act to seal him, meaning this peculiar energy that forces its way into the main character is in fact a piece of Dorman himself. The more Colossi that are defeated, the more of Dorman's influence spreads within Wander. In fact, every time a Colossus is defeated, but more specifically after Dorman's essence seeps into Wander, the player receives a permanent stat increase to both their health and grit meters. This can be interpreted as Dorman's life force granting Wander more strength as the two become one by altering the player character into something less than human. Ostensibly, while it is true that these statistics can also be improved by eating fruit and lizard tails scattered across the Forbidden Lands, almost invalidating this claim as nothing more than a simple gameplay trope, there's an interesting quote by the director, writer, and primary creative force behind Shadow of the Colossus, Fumito Ueda. Quote, "The fruit in the ancient land was set to get you closer to non-human existence." End quote. Knowing this, it's not a stretch to say that the deity's influence has affected the land itself in a way that even consuming the fruit and wildlife similarly allows for an individual to become one with the enigmatic deity. Dorman and Wander's unification is visually represented by a gradual state of degradation as Wander's appearance becomes more and more downtrodden, eventually culminating into his arguably demonic visage during the ending sequence. This slow and subtle process is a metaphorical depiction of Wander's obsession gradually destroying him from within, to the point where cracks begin to manifest on his steadily decaying body. Dorman, through this degradation, becomes the physical embodiment of this ever-consuming obsession, corrupting Wander more and more the closer he inches towards reaching his inevitable goal. The more one indulges in and allows their obsessions to take hold of them, the more they stray away from the person they used to be and degenerate into an unrecognizable husk. After defeating the 12th Colossus, there is a scene depicting a group of men in hot pursuit of the protagonist for his transgressions. These infractions are no doubt the theft of the ancient sword, trespassing into the Forbidden Lands themselves, as well as the grave robbing of Mono's corpse. When Wander slays the 16th and final Colossus, the group of men ultimately reach the Forbidden Lands only to discover the missing body of the sacrificed woman. During this, Wander is transported back to the Shrine of Worship. However, his appearance is a far cry from the man this group once knew. Eyes glowing blue, black veins visible on pale white skin, and unsightly horns protruding from the sides of his head. The two have finally become one. It can be said that this ghastly appearance, but more specifically the horns, are a physical manifestation of the repercussions of his actions. What gives credence to this is the fact that the horns were not at all visible prior to this scene, and were only revealed after defeating the final Colossus. This is a permanent mark, a symbol meant to declare what is done cannot be undone. During this ending sequence, Wander's body has, for all intents and purposes, become a host for the deity Dormin. The obsession has overtaken him completely. Thus, he is nothing more than a literal shell of his former self, with only glimmers of the man we once knew coming through, particularly in his desire to see Mono. To definitively illustrate how much of his humanity was lost during the process of fully realizing his single-minded endeavor, the men attempt to dispatch him the same way he had been exterminating each and every Colossus. A stab directly into the center of his being. It's no coincidence that a symbol is etched into his garments, a mark not dissimilar from the ones that acted as weak points on the Colossi themselves. After this assault, Wander, or rather Dormin in this case, transforms into a colossus of shadow and darkness, bringing in full circle how he has become the very thing he had been fighting against, all for the sake of his dubious quest. There is a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche that perfectly encapsulates the totality of everything Wander has done and become. Quote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." End quote. After the men escape from the clutches of the immense shadow being, a spell is cast to both disempower and siphon him into a vortex. While the men escape, another spell is cast to destroy the bridge that allows access into the Forbidden Lands, ensuring no one can enter or leave ever again. Afterwards, a seemingly unfazed Mono awakens to find an infant with the same horns Wander had just moments earlier. Even in rebirth, the past cannot be undone, and Wander must carry the weight of his actions with him. It has been confirmed by Fumito Ueda that this marks a distinct connection between Shadow of the Colossus and his prior title, Ico, for this is the first boy born with horns. There are many theories concerning Wander's identity, his relation to Mono, and why he decided to revive her. One of the most common interpretations of Wander and Mono's relationship is that they were mutual lovers. Wander, unable to cope with the loss of his love, decided to break the taboos of his people in order to revive her. As romantic as that sounds, an interesting detail that brings to question the validity of this interpretation is how Mono doesn't seem to recognize Agro, Wander's horse. Surely, if they were lovers, she would immediately recognize his faithful companion. It's unlikely that Wander obtained the horse after her death, given that her body still looks relatively fresh. Not to mention, the deep connection on display between man and horse is undeniable. This is made evident by how naturally Wander is able to ride Agro, and the fact that Agro responds when his name is called. The two of them share a profoundly harmonious connection, one that isn't likely to have been established over a short period of time. This leads to another interpretation, that Wander was still in love with Mono, but that it was a one-sided affair. It may have been that she was completely unaware of Wander's existence, and his love for her was something he kept to himself, but her passing forced him into action. While love is undeniably a powerful motivator, it's just as possible that Wander held no romantic feelings for Mono and is instead reviving her out of a sense of duty. Regardless of how good or bad the player themselves is at the game, it's evident based on his moveset that Wander is very skilled at both horseback and archery. Understanding this, it's not a stretch to assume that he was a warrior or soldier, and thus felt honor-bound to protect Mono. Something that gives at least a small amount of validation to this idea is that Dormin himself refers to Wander as a warrior. If he was acknowledged as such amongst his people, then it could also be that Mono was a priestess, a princess, or some other position of high standing, and it was Wander's duty to protect her. Therefore, her death, despite being part of a sacrifice, may have caused Wander to feel that it was due to his inability to protect her. The beauty of this game is that there are many more possible interpretations, more details to be speculated, and theories that could be crafted in an attempt to fully realize the backstory that led to the events of the game, as the ones mentioned only scratch the surface. However, regardless of how much one postulates on this matter, the end result is still the same. Wander committed questionable acts for the sake of the object of his obsession. That phrase, the object of his obsession, is typically one used in English. However, there is something of note to be discussed concerning it. This is the kanji for Mono's name in Japanese. Curiously, it typically translates into English as the word thing or object, for even her name cannot hide the fact that Mono truly is the object of Wander's obsession. Several elements of Shadow of the Colossus come together to express Wander's obsession in some way or another, and the reason is to impart a message to the player. Obsession is like a darkness within us all. Every person has the capacity for it, and it can consume any of us if we're not careful. While not everyone is obsessed, anyone can become obsessed over anything, which is why Wander's personality, for the most part, is rather nondescript, and why Mono is already deceased, and her name literally translates to the word thing, as they're primarily vessels to get across this message. Obsession can destroy us, the ones around us, and it can make people see the world differently. It can even twist our thinking to the point where the act of killing others in cold blood is justified as simply a means to an end. Our actions have consequences. What is done cannot be undone. What we as individuals do can have serious repercussions for those around us and even for generations to come. For even 1,000 years later, the Horned Boys in Aiko pay the price for Wander's unwillingness to let go. This has been your humble analyst, Daniel, and I hope to see you all again next time.